An unprecedented night in the United States. The protests continue for a seventh day over the killing of George Floyd in police custody. He died after he was pinned down for 9 minutes by a police officer. An official autopsy has now concluded his death was homicide involving neck compression. It bears out the findings of an independent autopsy, which said Floyd died from asphyxiation. So let's talk about tonight. Chaotic scenes outside the White House. Police cleared a peaceful protest using tear gas and stun grenades. And at the moment that was happening in the garden across the street at the White House, President Donald Trump threatened to deploy the military nationwide unless state governors got these sometimes violent demonstrations under control. He said it was his duty to uphold law and order.
We cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others.
Then, surrounded by the Secret Service, the president walked across the street through the gate of the White House to go to a church that had been damaged in Sunday's protests. He did not assess the damage, did not go to the basement where there had been the fire. He just stood there and held a Bible. So this church is part of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. The bishop for that diocese told the Washington Post she was outraged at the visit. Reverend Marion Biddle said, "I was not given even a courtesy call that they would be clearing the area with tear gas so they could use one of our churches as a prop. Everything he has said and done is to inflame violence. We need moral leadership, and he's done everything to divide us and has just used one of the most sacred symbols of the Judeo-Christian tradition." Shihab has been out at the protests in Washington, D.C., where a curfew is now in place. He sent this report.
We're about 3 blocks from the White House. The police have managed to disperse most of the protesters, although actually I'm seeing a gathering of protesters now just behind us, actually, and we're seeing some police activity moving in that direction now. The core group of protesters, however, remains behind us, kettled in by the police. So the police were very careful to escort the media out of the group, and then they kept a core group of protesters locked in, surrounded by the police, and we assume that they will be detained shortly. But now we just have a standoff, effectively, as we've seen so often in these evenings of protest. So joined by one protester. What's your name?
My name's Ariana Evans.
Another night, then, of protest. Do you think the message is getting through?
I think today, when I de-escalated that situation with the police, I think that showed that at least some of them are listening. Yes, we want to say all. We want them all to listen. We want them all to be involved in our progress. But if they don't want to speak up, if they want to comply with police brutality, that's on them. But those police officers that were peaceful and that listened and that decided to compromise with us and just have us move backwards peacefully, those are the kind of police officers we need everywhere. Because if not, we're going to keep having this problem. We're going to keep having to do these marches. We're going to keep having to chant. We're going to have to keep having to do all of this. And we're tired.
How does this end, then? Do the protests carry on? And what does change look like? What will mean that people stop protesting?
Change looks like the police getting better mental health care. Change looks like police being vetted more further. Change actually looks like making sure that these men and women are ready to police the communities that they're in. That's what change looks like. Change looks like prosecuting every single police officer with an unjustified police shooting and not sweeping them under the rug. That is what change looks like. We need to diversify the police force. There needs to be more people of more colors, more genders, more sexual orientations on these police forces, or we're going to keep running the same problems. Their bigotry and their oppression will keep going on if they do not have more diversity within their police forces. They need racial sensitivity training. There's just so many different ways that this situation could be resolved that the president and the DOJ have refused to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The demonstration appears to have moved a little bit further down there. We're a few hours now into the curfew. We will monitor the situation.
So the ACLU, that is the American Civil Liberties Association, says that it has responded to President Trump's approach to the demonstration, saying this: deploying more federal troops to suppress dissent would be irresponsible and dangerous. No level-headed governor is asking for an even more militarized response to civilian protests against police brutality and systemic racism. For good reason, the president must not cause the country and its people even more harm. And the presumptive Democratic nominee for President Joe Biden responded to Trump's actions this way. He said he's using the American military against the American people. He tear-gassed peaceful protesters and fired rubber bullets for a photo. For our children, for the very soul of our country, we must defeat him. But I mean it when I say this, we can only do it together. Let's go now to John Hendren, who joins us from Minneapolis, where all of this began. So usual nightly curfew, John, I hear a lot going on behind you. What's happening?
That's right, Rochelle. Tonight, the curfew began 2 hours later, so it's at 10 o'clock local time instead of 8 o'clock. But the police have been cracking down as soon as the curfew happens, or at least within an hour. So we are at ground zero here. On the far corner, where you see that crowd gathering, that is where George Floyd spent his last moments. In the near ground here, just under that cup food sign, there's a mural, a newly painted mural as a tribute to him. And you can just see the hundreds and hundreds of flowers that have been left underneath. Behind that, there is a crowd. This is where at least one of the main protests has remained. These people are all in defiance of the curfew, and they've been chanting call and response chants like no justice, no peace, say his name, George Floyd. Now we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know there's a pattern. The first 4 nights, the protesters dominated the streets. There were fires set, there was looting, and that went on. Police could not even come in with fire trucks in order to put out those fires because the city officials told us later they deemed it not safe enough, and so they just let those buildings burn. Well, once the National Guard came in with an extra 1,000 troops for a total of 1,700, in addition to the hundreds and hundreds of police that were here, that all changed. They came in 2 nights in a row, cleared out the protesters, immediately firing tear gas and rubber bullets. I would call it indiscriminate. They were not waiting for people to move. People were peacefully sitting down, and that was the police's way of getting them to move away. So a number of people got hit. Tonight, we expect the same thing to happen. The curfew is a little later, but the routine is likely to be the same. Nevertheless, these people here seem determined to stay here until the police come.
So, John, let's talk about what happened to George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd. We all saw the officer's knee on his neck for 9 minutes, but there were indications in the official first autopsy that the autopsy tried to allude to other causes that perhaps contributed to his death besides the knee on his neck. Now there's been an additional autopsy. So tell us how all these things line up now.
That's absolutely right. Now, we haven't seen the whole official autopsy from the Hennepin County coroner, but we know from the prosecutor's charges that that autopsy concluded that he died of not of asphyxiation, but that he died of a heart attack. They also said that he had a couple of underlying heart problems that contributed to it. But those charges also said that the coroner's report said police did contribute to his death. Now, the new autopsy, the private autopsy that has just come out, is much more direct. It says that he died as a result of 3 officers kneeling on top of him, not just the one with his knee on George Floyd's neck, but also the other 2 who had their knees on his back, that compressed his chest in ways that he couldn't get air to his brain. So what we have here, not really 2 completely opposite conclusions, but one is simply much starker and stronger than the other. And of course, that's the private one that was sought by his family. That concluded that not only did all 3 of those officers who were on the ground with George Floyd contribute to his death, but also that it was a homicide.
And still only one of those officers has been charged. John Hendren, live on the streets in Minneapolis. John, thank you very much. So authorities in New York have imposed a curfew on that city after large protests Sunday, largely peaceful, but some of them did turn violent. Gabriel Elizondo joins us live from New York. So Gabe, what is it like where you are right now?
Well, New York City is currently in curfew for the last 10 minutes or so that it kicked in. It is mostly peaceful. However, we are seeing some protesters here in Brooklyn, and they are defying the protests. Out on the streets here in Brooklyn, I would say there are about 300 or 400 of them. It's been peaceful at this point. They're chanting no justice, no peace, Black Lives Matter. And they are here basically to defy the curfew. We do not know what their plans are. We do not know what will come of this, but they're clearly out here to defy this curfew, and that's what they're doing. There are lots of police around here, but they are showing a lot of restraint as of right now. There's riot police you can actually, let's turn around, you can see the riot police are just on the other side of the street. They're showing a lot of restraint right now here in Brooklyn, but there are many, many officers out here, but they are simply just watching this right now, watching very closely. So they don't want to instigate anything, but this is where we're at right now.
Okay, so Gabe, to that point, yes, the officers are across the street now, but there have been, there's video of incidents where police are still being aggressive with protesters, peaceful protesters. There's been video of a police cruiser driven into people. There was a lot of controversy about the way Mayor Bill de Blasio responded to that particular thing. So what are we hearing from the leaders of New York, from the mayor of New York City, from the governor, Andrew Cuomo, about what is about the interaction between law enforcement and the protesters? Because the very thing they're protesting is police brutality.
Yeah, that's right. I think that there have been a lot of videos of police using heavy-handed nature, a lot of police using tear gas and other means. The governor and the mayor have both said that they do not condone any sort of police wrong activity in these protests. However, this is the first night of the curfew, and they have double the amount of police on the streets tonight. As one officer told me, he said, we are only out here to get the troublemakers, is in his words, off the streets. He said, we're not looking to make any trouble. We're not looking to anything other than to look for the troublemakers. But, you know, listen, there is a curfew going on right now, but the mayor and governor of New York have both said that they expect that the curfew will be enforced.
Okay, Gabe Elizondo live on the streets of New York. Gabe, thank you very much. So let's go to the other side of the U.S., to the West Coast now. There have been a series of protests throughout the day in Los Angeles. Rob Reynolds has been out there among those protests. So set the scene for us, Rob.
The scene here is Sunset Boulevard with the sun going down, and behind me, Rochelle, you can see a line of people who have been put under arrest by Los Angeles police. Their hands are tied with plastic handcuffs. They're being processed and waiting to be taken on board a bus, and then presumably they will be taken to jail. We don't know why these people were arrested. There is a chain drugstore over there that was broken into and partially ransacked. Another Starbucks coffee shop that was also smashed up. Police told us that there is active looting, in their words, underway on Hollywood Boulevard, really the heart of the sort of tourist Los Angeles. So while earlier we watched very peaceful protests and police being very restrained, here we are seeing that police are taking action to arrest people. And there is some ransacking and some stealing going on in the city of Los Angeles as we speak.
So, Rob, what is the governor Gavin Newsom saying about what's happening, about what he is seeing?
Governor Newsom spoke several hours ago. He gave a very, I think, kind of emotional speech, although he remained pretty calm. But he spoke about how the civil unrest and the overall problems that gave rise to it are not the fault of African Americans. They are the fault of society as a whole. He says it's all of us. And he said that it is no longer possible to simply work around the edges of this problem with, a new law about police cameras or body cameras or this or that. He said that's like just pruning the branches, the tips of the branches on a tree, and you need to rip the entire plant out by its roots. So that's a very striking image. And it was I have to say, it was a completely different kind of speech than the one we heard from President Trump a short while ago.
We're going to talk about that as well. Rob, thank you very much. They're on the streets in Los Angeles. Let's hear from a protester who was in another part of Los Angeles today who's been out in Van Nuys.
Everyone here has either had some family member that was affected by from these people. I'm trying not to cuss, but it's literally years of oppression. There's only so much people can take that are oppressed. With this capitalistic society, all this is what it breeds. This is exactly what it breeds. Fed up people. We don't want this to happen again. This has been happening over and over and over again. So now we're out here and we're doing exactly what they gave us. They gave us this. We don't want to be out here. None of these people want to be the out here. We already have enough to deal with. We already have enough to deal with this pandemic. So now we're dealing with another one that's just been sitting here from the beginning of time. It's been sitting here since the beginning of this country.